Hello, and thanks for joining us here on the Art Mentorship Society of Alberta's YouTube channel. My name is Tanninen, and I'll be guiding you through this series on painting acrylic basics. My lesson today will be how to paint simple forms.
Okay, so today we are going to be working on basic shapes and forms. So shapes, everybody knows square, triangle, circle, etc. I don't know if we need to go into that right now. I think we can handle it. So what we're going to do is try to add some three-dimensionality to those shapes. So I'm just using black and white acrylic paint here just to start off. I like to start with a good medium gray if I'm doing this. So I'm just gonna mix some gray. You need a lot more white than you think and a lot less black than you think to get to a medium gray. So this should be fine. So the first thing we want to do is let's try and make a pyramid. So with all three-dimensional shapes, you want to think about a light source. Wherever your light is coming from, in this case I'm going to use the light coming from the upper left corner. You should just be mindful of that, as it'll dictate where you put the shadows. So first of all, obviously a pyramid starts with a bit of a triangle. Take some practice to get the lines straight, but this little technique I'm showing you right here of adding it a little bit at a time can kind of give you a little bit more control than just trying to do it all in one stroke. If you do it at an angle like this, it will give the illusion of three-dimensionality even more, because it'll make the pyramid look like it's coming more towards you. In this case, with its elongated part at the bottom, it really looks like it's going to be more on top, and it's a little uneven, so I'm going to bring it down a bit more like that to bring the angle down to closer to what you might call eye level. So here we have one side. I'm going to water my brush down quite a bit. We're just sketching it in right now. And I want to get, actually, let's make it a bit darker on this side because we said the light was coming up from that way. So we're going to try and follow that line that we made in the first place. When you're doing three-dimensional angles like this, you can really play with the sharpness of the contrast between one side and another to really highlight that it's two different planes of the dimension. And we'll play with that a little bit more going forward. So we've got that line demarcated and that looks fairly crisp. So with little brush strokes bringing it down bit by bit, we're going to add the other side of the pyramid. Like that. And then, third side of the triangle. When you're making simple three-dimensional shapes, it can sometimes really help if you're looking at a source image. For example, if you wanted to look at the pyramids of Giza or pyramids from anywhere else in the world, like South America or Africa, you can choose those as a basis and observe what you're looking at, and try and keep in mind the dimensions, the scale, and the angles. So it'll take some sorting out. I'm going to lighten this side a little bit more, just so that you can see the differences in contrast. So right now, let's say this is a pyramid and it's sort of an overcast day. The sunlight might not be as bright on one side, so it'll be more, the difference will be more muted. So if we take more of the white and bring it in, and if we lighten this entire side, it'll be It will signify that the light is shining brighter on one side. Be careful to keep if you're doing these in grayscale or in any other color, that the contrast between lighter and darker or brighter and more muted isn't too great. You don't want to do strict black and white because it'll kind of come across more graphic than what our purposes are here. But if you want to make it graphic, obviously that's totally fine. So the light is coming from this way. So let's say it's hitting this plane head on. This is sort of off to the side. And then if there would be a shadow, the light would be coming down like this. So I would bring it in. The shadow would generally be probably the darkest. Anyways, depending on the light source, depending on the image or the surface that you're trying to paint, it'll be variable. So these are just basics. So it'll kind of just give you a general idea of what you can do. Shadows can be long, they can be short. This is purely for my imagination here. So I am trying to do it this way. That doesn't look quite right for me. I think maybe the sun will be coming directly from a different angle. It looks okay, but not exactly what I wanted to do. So acrylic paint, the best thing about it, dries really, really quickly. So we'll give it a second to dry and then we can change it up a bit. Okay, the drying did not take very long. It is acrylic paint. We're adding it in thinner layers here. A good way to tell if it's dry is if you hold it on an angle to the light, the shiny parts will appear wet and it's pretty easy to tell when it's dry. So because the background is white and we're using black and white, I can just change this angle and paint over it. Maybe we can straighten this line out here too. It looks a little crooked. Not crooked, but bent. I want to make it a bit more straight. Maybe I went a little overboard, but we can fix that in a minute. So we can add a sharper angle by just going in like so. And while we work on the shadow itself, we can wait for that part to dry. So this angle will come a bit more out like that, I think. And then this will come out this way. So it's gonna be a nice long, early morning, late evening shadow. But again, it depends on the light source completely. The varying dimensions and length of the shadow itself. If you splash paint or water on your canvas, as long as it's dry, you can just get your cloth a little bit wet and usually just clean it right up. It's one of the more convenient things about painting with acrylic. Get my brush nice and dry so there's not a lot of color on there. And then we can go in and fix that. I'm gonna give it another minute to dry because there's dark underneath and it's still blending, so we'll be right back. Another fun trick you can use to help paint dry faster, because sometimes it's better than just literally sitting around watching paint dry, is to use a hairdryer. Obviously, you might guess that I use this a lot more for drying paint than drying my hair, but I do use it quite frequently and it does a really good job of drying it really quickly. Again, you just keep an eye on the spots that look wet. When they no longer look wet, give it a second and it'll be dry. All right, that looks pretty dry to me. Feels dry. Did a little test with my finger. So, clean my brush. Get in with that white. And fix it. Make that line nice and crisp. You usually want the edges as crisp as you can make it. It takes practice, so don't worry if you're not getting it right away. Just practice whenever, and as you practice, it'll just get easier. And then now that that's been dried, it's easier to paint over. White is not always the most opaque of paints to use, so sometimes you might need to put a couple of layers. But for the purposes of this exercise, you can kind of get my drift. And then there's the pyramid. Sorry, I bumped the camera. And then you can just add, let's say it's a desert, because that makes sense for this purpose. Just add that in the background. Sometimes there might be, a few darker shadows in this if it's sand. Don't think that is quite right in there, so I'm going to fix it a little. There, just a little desert scene. If you were doing this on your own, if you wanted to do this exercise, you can spice this up however you feel. Maybe it's dusk. And you want to up the moodiness of it. You can make the sky darker. You make the sky bright. You can do whatever you want. You can fill the sky with flying pigs, and that is totally fine. It's your imagination, it's your painting. Follow your heart. Something that I like to do with skies, the night sky is obviously beautiful on a nice starry night. It's very poetic. You can just take the end of your brush, which is a fun trick. You don't always need to wet it. In your brush, dip it in the white paint, and it makes a clean point for some stars. There. So again, the pyramid is the form we'd worked on. We can apply it to many applications. In this case, make it stand out as a form within a landscape, which you can definitely practice and expand on as you go. And that could be quite helpful as you practice this. It'll allow you to have some sense memory, some physical muscle memory of making three-dimensional forms, and let your brain kind of wrap itself around that, which as you develop your practice, it will help you more easily create different environments and shapes. So we'll show you another form for exercise. I use this one a lot because I tend to paint a lot of interiors of rooms. I just find that motif is really versatile. You can do a lot with it. It's fun to sort of imagine your own spaces and fill it with whatever your heart desires. So usually start with the medium gray to set the tone. You can start with darker, you can start with lighter. I start with the medium just because I like to determine what it is I'm working with. It makes sense for me. Whatever works for you, works for you. So for something like planes, let's say we're doing an interior, a room, a set of rooms, a bisection of a home or an interior, like you're looking into a playhouse, like when you were a kid and you can open the playhouse up and you see the sections there, or a from life observational painting of an interior space. So I like to imagine often that these interiors are maybe gallery spaces. Galleries in particular, the white cube style is very simple angles and very formal structurally. So they're a good way to start. You can always embellish them later, which I can show you after we've got the basic shapes down. So we've added the sort of parallelogram square shape as a direction to start with. And then I'm going to use a lighter color on this side this time. And add the other side of it. So this might be, if we're imagining them as walls, this might be the wall that we are facing from our angle. So we're trying to get a sharp contrast line there. You don't need to make it as contrasted. When you're painting things like interiors or angular shapes from a real life object that you're observing, pay attention to the values between one angle and another. For these purposes, this just sort of gives you the general basics of what we're doing, but just like with the pyramid and any other form, it just takes more practice and more experimentation and find out what you like. If you want to abstract it at all, that's fine. If you want to make these angular lines more blurry, more abstract, want to make them wiggly, you can play around with that too. It's your imagination, it's your painting. We want to find your voice. So we've got that. What I might do with this one is continue this line out. And it's going to go off the edge of the canvas, but that's fine. It's like a photograph, let's say. And it just is outside of the frame. So let's say there is perhaps a doorway there. So keeping the top as straight as you can if we're doing this style, and the bottom would be the end of the wall that meets the floor. Keep that as even as you can. If you're doing this on a larger canvas, a trick that I do is I'll take the end of my paintbrush and I'll hold it to the bottom of the wall and put my finger right here to get the measurement. And then you can move it along and make sure it's all the same angle if you want it to appear in alignment with the canvas to make it more angular like that. So the next thing, let's add a roof to this. So this is going to be a really boxy structure. So sometimes what might help is to turn your canvas to the side, which can help you guide your hand. You can put your finger on the side of the canvas to help you get a straight line. Be pretty fussy with the angles as you go, but again, the great thing about acrylic is that it dries quickly and it's very forgiving, and you can just go over it later if you don't like it. Bring that line down a little. And this is an instance where I'm trying to make the roof of the structure, let's give it more of an angle, the lightest point, as if the light is coming down from on top, which, you know, usually it does. It's a little too close to that gray, so I'm going to bring in some more white, or a lighter gray in this sense, and just make that a sharper angle. Hands get a little wobbly, that's totally fine, just takes practice, but I mean, I've been doing this for a very long time and my hands still get wobbly, so it's fine. And then just for the purposes of making this seem like it's a structure and that's being displayed, you can even make it a structure displayed in another room, which is kind of fun, like a structure within a structure. So what we could do is imagine that this is the ground or the floor behind this little hut structure that we've made. And similar to the back of the pyramid, we can give this even more three-dimensionality by adding something behind it. This is tough because holding your hand steady against the side of the canvas when it's a small shape like this takes a bit of practice, but just takes practice. Acrylic painting is really forgiving. Just give it a chance to dry, it will be fine. You want to try and match these angles together. It'll make the shape look more even, sort of how you want to make these shapes, these angles as well. To match to, it's just perspective, which we can do another time. So that's almost there. Not quite a sharp enough angle. That's a bit better. Adding water to your paint will make it spread around a little easier. Sometimes it's really good to get a bit of a wash down, whatever color you're using. It will make the surface of the canvas take the next layers more easily, and also it'll just fill in the tiny surface areas, you know, the texture of the canvas. It'll help fill that in, so when you go over with the next layer, some of the lower areas will be filled in. They're really small, it's hard to see, but there you go. So what we can do next is work on this little doorway we have here. Sometimes you can use masking tape. If this were bigger, I would definitely be using masking tape to get really sharp corners. You can use the same trick that I showed you here with the paintbrush to measure the angles with masking tape. So you lay the masking tape down and make sure that it's even to get it straight up and down, or whatever angle you'd like. So I'm going to try and match this color here, which seems like this is pretty good. Just give that another layer. And then turning my canvas again, just because it's easier for me. It depends on if you're right or left-handed. Let's get in there. Carefully add the inside of the door. So we have the inside of the door, and that'll give more of a, you know, dimensionality to it. And then let's say we want to do the inside, like the inside of the room. I think that I will line up with this. Actually, no, I'm going to bring it a bit lower because the end of the floor would be at the bottom of this line, because that seems to be the back. So it's a relatively shallow angle because we're looking at it from that distance or angle. Always wanting to make sure that the contrast is enough to distinguish one part from another part. This room might not be very well lit, or the structure, so I'm going to go in with a darker color, or in this case shade. Turning my canvas again because it's easier for me to get a better angle. This looks like some practice to get the confidence and just the muscle memory applied to the skills that you're developing. The more you practice, like with anything, the better you'll get at it. So there we have a structure within another structure. You could even go so far, I'm going to turn this again, to add another part of a wall here. Let's imagine it ends there-ish. So that angle still dry, so you can wipe it up a bit. And then it's a structure within a structure. And then maybe there are some people standing around, kind of contemplating what they're seeing. People, human figures are a whole other thing we'll be covering in our next video. They're a bit more complex, so we're starting with these simple shapes. And always go over the shading and play with it as much as you want. You can lighten it, darken it, change the color, go over it again, paint it over and over and over and over and over until you get whatever desired effect that you like. So we have a little room within a room, reminds me of a gallery. In the gallery room, they're looking at this structure. You can do whatever you want with this structure. You can add pictures within pictures, which is fun. I use this in my practice a lot. The interiors allow you to experiment with many different styles or genres of painting. For example, I could put a landscape on this picture here, and then if I wanted to do another picture on this side, you could put maybe a little portrait in there. Possibilities are endless. You can apply this however you like. Any ideas that you have, try them out, continue to experiment. The more you experiment, the more you'll find your own voice. Let's put another picture in here. It'll kind of give more dimensionality to this structure. A couple pictures hanging on the wall. You can really just keep going and adding more and more depth to this. So the last basic form that I'm going to show you is going to be a sphere. A sphere can be the most challenging shape. If you can get a good handle on making a sphere, it's maybe the most applicable, versatile way to create three-dimensional objects, particularly organic forms, fruit, human beings, even furniture, textiles, blankets, pillows, clouds, anything that is not like a more angular shape. So first thing you want to do is try and get a circle. You can use, I've got this glass here. I can just clean the bottom of it so I'm not super worried. Classic way to get an even circle. Just gonna give this a quick rinse before I throw it in the dishwasher. And then I'm going to fill it in. Fine by filling it in again, just like with the other shapes, you get your medium gray from which you can start adding your lighter and your darker shades to show where the light's coming from and to give it its three-dimensional effect. So basically that's our sphere. What I'm going to do, get out the old hair dryer, dry it quickly for you, and then we'll be right back to add the other layers. Quick safety tip with the hair dryer, don't hold it too close to the surface that you're drying. The air will backfire throughout the hair dryer and it can cause sparks in here, which could lead to some problems. So make sure you're holding it far enough away that it's giving a good amount of air, and if you move it around a bit too, it'll help. but don't hold it too close. It's just a safety concern. We don't want any sparks flying. So that's dry. I've taken the time to refresh my water. Something that you can do as frequently as you want. If the more frequently you do it, the less chance you'll have of the color of the water, in this case the gray, gotten pretty gray, will affect what you're painting. So you've got a nice clean brush, completely clear water. Next thing we're going to do, a little bit of water on there, but that's okay for this purpose. It's already dry. The next thing we're going to do is start where the light would come in. So if we're going to, let's say the light is coming in from this side. Take some white, lighten that gray. I'd want to go between white and that shade. So how's this? That's okay for now. So start with the center of where you might think the light is coming down from. Put down a circle. I'm going to clean my brush, dry my brush, make it a bit bigger here. Dry my brush again, and you can blend just with little strokes. This will take practice as well, but little strokes to move that paint outwards and blend it. Blending it out. Add another layer. Again, this is something that you would benefit from looking at a three-dimensional object, a cue ball, a ball, any kind of round sphere. So just keep adding the lighter colors here until you feel like you've got sort of, I don't know, if I would say if you want to do a classic sphere, let's say you want maybe a third of the surface area of the curved sphere to be between the darkest and the lightest. So that looks all right to me for now. You'll see as we progress how that will change. And then I'm gonna give that a second to dry. All right, so that's dry. We're gonna go the next shade up with probably quite a bit more white into there. And then in the middle of where you have that, do that same process again. So for this purpose and this imagined light source, I'm using sort of little scribbly paint strokes very lightly. I just find that that technique helps you apply the paint evenly, but not too harshly. You can go over the middle part of it on the inside where you want it to be more bright, a little colder. Clean your brush, something that you should be doing frequently, especially when mixing colors or adjusting shades. That way the paint will be easier to use and be more effective. Go ahead and add some white in the middle here. I think you can kind of see where we're going, where we're trying to add the brightest spot here. While that dries, really dry my brush. Take a bit more of the light, and I think we can bring this out a bit. Too much paint on there, dab it off. Small strokes, blend it out. All right, back to the white. Re-add that lighter area here. If you leave the paint heavier and don't blend it as much, the white becomes more opaque. So if you add a layer of the white, try not to blend it in too much in the center, because that will be counterproductive to the highlight that you're trying to make. And then you can blend it in, drying your brush again, and sort of just blend it out. While that dries, we'll work on the shadow. I'm going to take a darker gray here, and then what you do is the light source is coming here, so the shadowed part will be on the opposite side. Little brush strokes, easier to control, easier to follow the curved line, easier to make little adjustments to the curved line like right here. Don't go all the way around, don't go too far. So imagine it as like an angle. So the highlight is here, so let's say the shadow might be at this angle to maybe this angle, I'd say almost right up and down. This is where observing an actual sphere and where the light hits it and where the shadows fall is very handy. But these are just basics, and this should allow you to get a general idea of what you're doing when you do observe an actual shape, and how to accomplish translating what you're seeing into what you're painting. So that's a good shadow, I think. It is a bit dark. Because it's wet, because of this particular technique I'm using, I can just wet my brush right off a bit, and then pull that paint out a bit. Pull that dark right from where it is, and pull it out into the medium gray, blending that even further. Don't be afraid to use your fingers if you want to, or a cloth. Sometimes wet paint has a tendency to mottle, and that is okay. This is giving it a bit of texture though. Right now it's kind of reminding me of an orange painted in black and white because of these little pools of paint that the watered down paint is giving me. Fix that little angle too. It's not quite as round in that particular spot as I want it to be. All right, that works for me. So there you have the sphere.
So those were some basics on painting simple forms with acrylic paint. Those techniques can be applied in many different ways. It's very versatile. You can expand those techniques on painting any kind of three-dimensional looking shape that you want. You just need to keep practicing and developing it. And you can join us on our next video for some more advanced forms. I'm Jay Tanninen. You can find me on Instagram at jtanninen, and you can find the Art Mentorship Society of Alberta on Instagram at amsa_gram. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you soon.